We completed video 1 with the following conclusion. The Russian soul was divided. While there were some old-time believers in old holy Russia, or in blood and soil, they were having a difficult time perpetuating their political institutions. Between Zanya's Tolstoyan pacifism and the modern enlightenment of Roman and Xenia, who both had contempt for the old ways. Zanya, out of a simple sentiment of pity and patriotism, joins the army to defend the motherland. But it is difficult to see how a country with such diverse and modern objections to the country's principles and politics could long endure. Chapter 10 begins with a treatment of the war on its own terms, from the point of view of General Samsonov and Solzhenitsyn's fictitious aide-de-camp Tentative. Almost the whole of the military position of the Russians at the onset of the war is captured in Chapter 10, where we get a look at the mind of General Samsonov, and Chapter 11, where Tentative, sent from central headquarters, assesses the situation. The rest of this section, up till we meet Vladimir Ilyich Lenin in the first omitted and then added Chapter 22, is about the regime-level seeds of the Russian army's debacle. Military matters are a reflection of political matters, as Clausewitz implied when he said that war was policy by another means. It is policy by other means, and if your policy is incompetent or unclear or anachronistic or unsustainable, so will the war waging. Such is the case here. Let us focus on chapters 10 and 11 and then turn to the rest of the section from chapters 12 to 21 to help illustrate the main points made in these earlier chapters. First, chapter 10 and General Samsonov. Samsonov, the loser at Tannenberg, is the scapegoat for Russia's defeat, and Solzhenitsyn shows that Samsonov was hardly put in a position to succeed. The loss at Tannenberg is traceable to the incompetence and lack of modernity of those above Samsonov. This is part of Solzhenitsyn's overall view, which is that the peasantry seems relatively healthy, but that the higher up you go in Russia, the more confusion and sickness you find. Samsonov is ill-suited to lead the Second Army in the Western Russian front. Samsonov had cut his teeth in the Russian East. Before his stint in the East, he had been Russian Chief of Staff in the Warsaw Military District. He hadn't been in war operations in nearly a decade. He had never commanded even a corps in action. No one had acquainted him with the war plans in the region. He was not given time to study them, nor had he enough leisure to think about his situation. Yet, for all of this, a few pages into chapter 10, Solzhenitsyn owns that if the army commander was unprepared, his corps were even in a far worse state. Not a single one was up to strength. The allotted corps cavalry had not arrived. The infantry had detrained ahead of schedule in the wrong places. The whole army were dispersed over a territory larger than Belgium. There wasn't enough transport. There weren't supplies enough. There weren't depots for the supplies. There weren't enough horses. No one had reconnoitered the land, and no one could find the Germans. Things looked bad, but no one knew how bad. This daunting list of problems hardly scratches the surface, for they are all the reflection of the Russian regime itself. The army group commander, Zielinski, made assumptions about what the Germans were doing and ordered Samsonov to walk into a trap. Zielinski's memo to Samsonov: "Push on, push on. We can only win by going faster, faster. The enemy is slipping away from you." Zielinski gets us to the sickness. Bear with me here. Zielinski got the job of Army Group Commander after Samsonov had nearly been approved for the position. This was the result of court intrigue. When the corrupt war minister Solzhenitsyn raised false accusations against Samsonov. Zielinski had access to high places, links with the household of the Tsar's mother, who seems to have had something to do with Zielinski's rise to the top. The rise of these intriguers put men who were ill-equipped making decisions at the top of Russia's military. Zielinski's daily orders were given 65 miles from behind the lines, without reconnaissance, by horseback instead of wire, and made assumptions about his enemy's behavior that he did not seek to verify. This was a recipe for disaster. Samsonov complained, but not bitterly. He was a company man in a sense, Samsonov. He would not question whether Zielinski deserved the rise to the top, because it was not for him to judge how far it was proper for the Dowager Empress to influence the fate of the army. Samsonov was an old-time Russian, hard-nosed, innocent, would never dream of criticizing the Russian imperial family, nor of putting forward his own interpretation of Russia's higher interests. Yet this attitude had helped create an atmosphere of irresponsibility that would cost Russia a central government based not on honor but intrigue, based not on merit but connections. Samsonov would have preferred to carry out his orders precisely as received. But what if the orders were completely senseless? What if they were obviously harmful to the national cause? Solzhenitsyn has, Samsonov asked. Solzhenitsyn puts the following thoughts into Samsonov's head near the end of chapter 10. It may be shameful to bow to Zielinski, but bow he must. A visitor arrives to Samsonov at the end of chapter 10, and we are introduced to Tentative in chapter 11. Samsonov and Tentative hit it off immediately in chapter 11. Samsonov feels as if Tentative is a man that God has sent to him, that he can talk to, and he lays out the strategic situation as he sees it. Without recognizance or intelligence, they don't know where the Germans had retreated to after the minor defeat in the north. Samsonov has a daring and able plan to deal with this ignorance, and they need to move forward. But the headquarters under Zielinski make it impossible. Samsonov shows Tentative that the army is headed into a disaster, and that Samsonov has ideas to stop it, though the orders that Zielinski is given are the cause of that disaster. Here we find out what kind of a man Tentative is. He sympathizes with Samsonov's plight. He had dreamed up this little trip and sold the idea to his colleagues. It had sickened him to languish in the general headquarters as a clerk, while messages arrive 48 hours late to be of any use. He loved his country, and he would use the laxity in its ways to protect it. He longed, in the words of chapter 11, to find the invisible Germans, to divine their plans, to feel the prick of their bayonets with his own ribs before the thrust came, to hear their first round of artillery long before the shell exploded with a crump high in the air. The obsession which throbbed within him was to solve a riddle. His destiny was to make a decision. His tact must be to make it seem to be the army commander that it was Samsonov himself who had made it. Tentative springs into action, hoping to augment Samsonov's second army with corps that had been taken from him. Individual initiative might be able to save the day, and he is going to get the corps of Artamonov back into the Second Army, thus increasing its size by 50%. All without involving the incompetents back in the Army Group headquarters. In fact, Tentative is going to ride himself into the belly of the beast and deliver the orders. The chapter does not end here, but it contains this idea of a man riding on a white horse to save the day. Perhaps Tentative is God's man in more ways than one. As I say, the chapter doesn't end here, for Tentative wants to take a plane to the lost corps, but all the planes are out of service. He thinks about sending a coded message to the corps, but then finds that Samsonov's staff doesn't use codes for its messages. It broadcasts orders uncoded for all the world to hear, hoping that the Germans don't work late at night listening to Russian broadcasts. This is the picture of the Russian army. Status seekers without military training running the show. Solzhenitsyn makes this amply clear in the next chapter. The ruin of the Russian army was the system of seniority. The supreme and indisputable factor was length of service and promotion by seniority. What chance was there that such men could grasp the lightning speed of modern warfare or the need for efficient, sensitive, two-way communications? End quote. Running the show from a safe distance, which makes one ignorant of what's going on. No efforts to reconnoiter the enemy or use modern technology like planes and railroads. Victory in war all depends, as the Russians thought, on courage and will. The Russian idea was the old Kutuzov motto: we will win in the end by sheer tenacity. This attitude manifests itself in numerous ways, which we will explore in the next video.